Okay, so today we are going to Italy. Last time, do you guys remember this place? Karlovy Vary, which means Charles's bath, King Charles's bath, because he was the guy who discovered the water, the thermal springs that became part of everything that we did for Carlsbad Aqua last time. And does anybody remember what the description was of what Carlsbad Aqua tastes like? Yeah. Yes, Jenna, you're close. Like mud with a rusty nail. So it was tough. So now, out of Germany, well, actually, Prague and the Czech Republic, now we're going south into the Alps that are in the north of Italy. And we're here in the area called Trento. And there is a place called the Sugana Valley, Volsugana. And within that area, let's see if I can find the doop, 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 doop. Some of you might actually have been there. I've never been there. Okay. In this valley, there's some little lakes, and there's this place called Levico Terme. And that is what we're talking about today. Water from the springs, water from the lake, water from all over the place. Kelly, that's a good question. Kelly says, so I can save the recording from the hub. I don't believe that you'll have access to save the recording from the hub, but you can absolutely make a recording, a bootleg recording with your phone, with the audio track of what we're talking about today. I don't think you're going to be able to grab the recordings from the hub if you're subscribed to the hub. You get to play them, but they're held on Vimeo in a way that makes them kind of hard to bootleg. So you have to create your own bootleg material. Okay? All right. So this area that you're seeing is an area that it has been used as a healing spring for over 400 years. Now, the Levico aqua comes in two types, strong and weak. And the strong water of Levico comes from these springs at the edge of one of the fault lines in the Alps in the Valsugana area. And this is high up. This is like 1,500, 1,600 meters. So getting close to a mile high, like Denver kind of high for those of you who are in the US. And there is on the slopes of these pine forests a place where long ago there were mines to take copper and ferrous sulfate, iron sulfate, out of the mountain. And the water flowed along the rocks along this fault line into this tunnel and out of there. And because it seeped into this place that we know is really rich with copper and with iron, and actually also with arsenic, it formed pools of water there in the old abandoned mines where the rock was all exposed, and people would go get themselves in there. Now, this is fundamentally different than in Carlsbad. A seep, a spring, is not the same as an upwelling of heat. Different, completely different minerals. You know, people talk about the aqua group of remedies as if they're all equivalent, but no, that is not true. They have very different equivalences. Okay, so in the 1600s, already the histories of the Council of Trent, see that where it says Trento? In the 1600s, the town was already talking about these special waters. And they opened the first spa during sort of La Belle Epoque of spa travel in the 1860s. And all of the people of means who could go take their sick little selves somewhere would go there and get into the waters or drink the waters. And the water here, unlike some of the things that we've talked about, like back when we did Skookumchuk and said, yeah, that doesn't exist anymore. These are things that you can absolutely get right now. These are, you can even go there and get your own little bottle of water. You know, it's like going to get the water from the spring at Lourdes or something. Now, Levico water was incorporated into anthroposophic medicine very early on. And Rudolf Steiner said about it that the waters of Levico seemed to be prepared by a good spirit in order to develop the outer nature of forces that are capable of playing a favorable role in the human organism. Now, I just want you to keep that in mind as we talk, because Levico is included in a lot of anthroposophic medicine, and the rest of the world kind of ignores it. Okay? Now, I want to show you Levico is quite different than what we saw in some of the others. Here's the temperature. These commas are what we would in the US would see as a decimal point. So it's got a pH of 6.3, which is quite neutral. The amount of total dissolved solids is 37 milligrams per liter. And this is very, very different than what we were looking at with Carlsbad, which has a lot of stuff in there. And if you look at the amount of calcium, the amount of sodium, the amount of silica, these numbers are small. And so Levico is known as one of the lightest mineral waters. It is called minimally mineral. I think we should make that a tongue twister, minimally mineral. And so it is sold widely in Italy as a drink to have with your dinner, a special bottled mineral water, like with Perrier and with, you know, any of those. Okay? It is fundamentally different than what we see in a lot of the other aquas. So it was introduced to homeopathy by Burnett, who was remarkably open-minded compared to other homeopaths of the era. Burnett began practicing and just was gathering all the information about what was happening with healing in general and incorporating what he could. He is the only one that advocated for its use. It's very hard to find published cases of it. And he only used it as an adjunct, and I use it as an adjunct. And I'm going to show you exactly how it applies as we talk today. Our documentation about it comes from an 1897 edition of the Homeopathic Recorder Journal. where it talks about how German physicians were using Levico. And it quotes a doctor from Munich and a doctor from Berlin saying that they gave it in 2 to 3 ounce doses to scrofulous children and anemic children. Who remembers what scrofula means? Tubercular, exactly. Here, Patricia has asked that I put these Steiner's words into the chat for you guys. Which water was from Carlsbad? It's called Carlsbad aqua. It's easy to track down. Okay, so scrofulous and anemic children. Now, because this had iron sulfate in the mines that they were mining, we can imagine. Now, think about the difference in the 1880s to what the average child was eating. How many vitamins? How many vitamin supplemented food products do we now have in our world? We have nutrition added to bread, to every processed product, in a way that was not true at all in this world. So at the time, in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s, people did not have the kind of nutrition. They didn't have the vegetables in the wintertime. There was a lot more difficulty just because of poor diet. And so they were using this basically as a mineral supplement. But there's more. There's an additional doctor from Berlin who says that he found Levico water especially useful in chorea minor. Do you guys know what this is? Chorea. Oops, I wrote it wrong. Eek. Chorea minor. This is twitching. Good. Excellent, Philip. Twitching, rapid, uncoordinated, jerking movements of the hands and the face and the feet. It's like a tiny subset of St. Vitus dance, which you guys might have heard of, or Sydenham chorea. And what was the underlying infective process for these? What was the underlying infective process? Oh, it's a good guess. Philip says tarantula bites. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Actually, we're looking for something a little bit different. Not tetanus. This came up with rheumatic fever. It's actually reported, chorea minor is reported in about 1/3 of patients with acute rheumatic fever. And St. Vitus dance is reported in about 40% of people with rheumatic fever. And how do we get rheumatic fever? We don't see this anymore because of why? Strep, yes. So now we are all on the page. This is the strep ground central. The reason why we don't see chorea minor and why we don't study it in school, why we don't see St. Vitus dance, is because we have antibiotics. And strep doesn't go to these advanced stages. But it does show up in our practice, doesn't it? So in people with Sydenham chorea or chorea minor, the research shows us that behavioral problems are common. 77% report some sort of anxiety disorder or depression. Obsessions and compulsions show up in 70% of patients, and 16% of them actually are strong enough that they meet the criteria for obsessive compulsive disorder. ADD and ADHD and general hyperactivity is found in 45% of these patients. I'm talking about chorea minor and Sydenham's chorea, active rheumatic fever. Carditis appears in about 80% of the patients. And this is always the big risk. If you have a strep that progresses, is it going to do something bad to your heart? Well, how do we see this now? Irina says, did the same slide show and freeze? No, in this class, I don't have PowerPoints. Pandas, excellent, Jill. Pandas, excellent, Krista. What we're talking about here is the strep terrain. It's pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with streptococcal infections. And it is considered in the conventional world to be a controversial diagnosis, but what it means to us is subacute strep. So in 2004, there was a meta-analysis that in 2020, a meta-analysis that reviewed 29 studies on strep carriers. And what they found was that the prevalence of strep in children who have no signs of pharyngitis, no signs of strep throat, was 12% in the population. In another study, a longitudinal study that was done for 4 years of 100 school-aged children between 5 and 15, average age was 9, they tested throat cultured every 2 weeks during the school year. And if they tested positive, they checked in with that kid to say, do you have symptoms? If they had no symptoms, they tested again the following week and the following week. What they found was that strep carriers accounted for 27 to 32% of the cohort of children they tested each year. And if you tested positive as a carrier 1 year, you were statistically much more likely to be a positive carrier the next year. So this is the land of Levico. When doctors were using this before, they were working with the frank illness, and Levico was dealing with these manifestations of rheumatic fever. And we're just not going to see that because people have antibiotics, they have access to other kinds of medications that weren't around in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s when these doctors were getting fantastic results with this. So here's what you want to look for. Number 1, chronic debility, underfunction, fatigue. Remember how arsenicum album, one of its indicators is fatigue out of proportion for the pathology that's present. Somebody who gets a little sniffle and they're totally wiped out. So, fatigue. Second one, history of anemia. Third, history of strep throat. Fourth, history of strep infections in the nail beds, paronychia. Fifth, someone who is a known strep carrier or they have a strep carrier in their family. And this is someone who tests positive to strep all the time, but they don't have any symptoms. And the last indicator is anything in the pandas terrain. You have a child who had strep throat. They were on several rounds of antibiotics. They've never been well since. That is our prime target for Levico. Now, Burnett tells us that he gave 5-drop doses of the source water in warm water, diluted in warm water, 3 times a day. And my experience with this is that it must be given frequently in order to be effective. So 3 times a day, even 5 times a day when someone is acutely ill. Dosing that was used by Burnett, by Boricki, by a lot of other authors who have written about it was in the low X potencies, 2X up to 12X. And you can order Levico water in a D2, which is like a 2X, a product made by Weleda. You can Google it online. It's available in Germany. It's available in Switzerland. You have to buy it from someplace that'll ship it to the United States. Once you've got it, you can put it in dropper bottles and give it to people so that they can be taking their 5-drop dose in warm water 3 times a day. You give it for up to 3 weeks. And Burnett said that he saw this after people had been given a deep nosode like basilinum. That's when he would use it. He saw these as children who were tubercular. Well, there was no concept at that time of a strep miasm. But if you test tubercular sputum, there was a study that was done in Nepal where they had, I can't remember, I think 150 people in 2020. And they had 150 tuberculosis suspect patients. And out of that 150 people, 12.6%, the sputum cultured for TB, and 9% of those people cultured positive for strep. So 3/4 of the tuberculosis positive people also had strep in the sputum. So I think this is what Burnett was tagging on to, and this is where we can see it. So when you have a client with the indications we talked about, and you're working with whatever best indicated remedies, and we're just talking about the background terrain, what can you do? You give them whatever the best indicated remedy is in whatever way you would ordinarily do, and you add Levico aqua 5 to 10 drops in warm water 3 times daily, and you do this for 3 weeks and then you stop. And then you alternate with something else that also addresses strep and also supports the immune system. The presence of strep tells us that their immune system's wonky. Something like Ceanothus americanus as a tincture. Maybe one of you guys can put the name of that in the chat for people who may not be very familiar with it. Ceanothus. You could give that in a like 2x, 3x mother tincture. Same thing, once or twice a day for 3 weeks. You could also give usnea tincture. Do you guys know usnea? For all of us who live in the Pacific Northwest in the cold and the damp and the mold and the moss, usnea is known as old man's beard. It's a tree moss, and it has been used by the native tribes of the Pacific Northwest for hundreds of years. It's been used in Chinese medicine for 2,000 years, particularly when you see the strep terrain and the fatigue, chronic debility, and headaches. Alternate Levico, a few weeks of Levico with a few weeks of usnea using the mother tincture, 5 drops in water once or twice a day. Another alternation that you can use Levico back and forth with is redwood gemotherapy. And this is for fast-growing children. You know, the old homeopaths called them weedy children with a strep terrain. And so you can alternate the the Levico with redwood gemmo using standard gemmo dosing. You can also alternate Levico with silica 6X cell salts. It has an affinity for strep terrain and the fatigue. Now you gotta be cautious a little bit about silica. Remember that you have to screen those people. No enhancements to their original equipment manufacturer. Nothing added. You know, people's piercings in private places tend to fall out and they get very upset. People who have plates on their bones and things like that, don't give them silica. Choose one of these other options. Another option is Olea Europa. Have you guys read the proving of this that Jeremy Shear did? Olea Europa is olive, and the 6C of this is excellent. Go read Jeremy Shear's proving. It has been used herbally for long-term immune support forever, forever, forever. And it's a great alternative with Levico. I think it's interesting that they're both such Italian things. So you give Levico for a few weeks and then you give olive for a few weeks, back and forth. Another option that also is quite specific for strep terrain is sumac. And this is Rus glabra. Do you guys know this remedy? You can give it in mother tincture, just like chelidonium is a homeopathic potentized medicine, and we also use it in mother tincture. Rus glabra, which is made from sumac. There's actually, if you go Google around, the National Institutes of Health has done some excellent research about this, showing that the presence of Rus glabra kills off a wide variety of bacteria. This sumac is Rus glabra. Yeah, there definitely are different forms of it. Thank you for checking. Okay. There are, in Germany, in Switzerland, many products that use Levico aqua. So those of you who are off in Europe that are part of the hub, you've got a big advantage. We have to worry about getting those things in here. And we can order from Helios. Helios has 12X of Levico. Remedia has 12X and C7. D9, some of those low potencies. So I meant different forms of sumac. I was asking which form of sumac is used to make the Rus glabra. Rus glabra is the plant of sumac that's used to make the tincture that they've done the research on that shows that it kills off strep. There are other Rus subspecies that are also called sumac. I don't know how else to answer this again. It's the plant Rus glabra. Okay. All right, so that's it, guys. I want to encourage all of you. We've talked about the indicators for Levico: chronic debility, history of anemia, history of strep throat, strep infections in the fingers, someone who's a known strep carrier, anyone in pandas terrain. For any of these people, giving them this as an adjunct helps their body repair that strep terrain. Okay, and then you can alternate it in 3-week chunks with usnea or with redwood gemmo or with silica cell salt or with Olea Europa in a low C potency or with sumac mother tincture. And all of these will help gradually back and forth. And they don't disrupt the chronic remedies that you're working with. Do all the great things that you already know how to do. Just add these in with it. Okay? That's it, guys. Next time we meet, we will be talking about an American aqua again. We're coming back to this side of the pond, and we're going to be talking about Gettysburg aqua. Okay? Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.